Day 1. The silence after the storm. The alarms had stopped. And for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because I was afraid of death, not exactly, but because the silence was worse. Silence in space wasn't comforting. It wasn't peaceful. It was a warning. A reminder that whatever had just happened wasn't over, that whatever waited beyond the hull didn't care if we survived. I remember the sound before the silence. The meteor's swarm tore through our ship like a living blade, metal shrieking, glass shattering, alarms screaming until they became a single unbearable scream that rattled through my chest and made every bone vibrate. I braced myself against the control panel with every ounce of strength I had, knuckles raw and bleeding, and prayed I wouldn't be ripped from this fragile vessel into the void. And now silence. I pressed my back to the scorched panel, trying to steady my breathing, trying to convince myself that I was still alive. My pulse throbbed in my temples. Across the cabin, Mara floated in her harness, hair drifting around her face like smoke caught in zero gravity. Her eyes were wide, sharp, and terrifyingly focused on me. Alive. Thinking. Assessing. Always assessing. Status? Her voice was low, tight, threaded with tension. I could hear the command in it, the part of her that refused to give in to panic. I swallowed hard. Engines offline. Main comms dead. Backup oxygen only. Navigation is useless. My hands shook as I scanned the scorched displays. We're drifting. Her jaw worked, and she didn't speak for a long time. She just floated there, eyes flicking to the viewport. I followed her gaze. Earth. Pale, distant, impossibly fragile. A marble in the endless black. A world we could see but not touch. And that thought, it hit me like a fist in the gut. We were alone. Absolutely alone. I moved carefully, unstrapping myself from the harness. Microgravity was a double-edged sword. It allowed us to float effortlessly, but every small mistake could send me spinning into a wall, into a dangling cable, into disaster. Every movement needed precision. Every breath needed calm. And yet, my chest was hammering like I had run 100 meters in seconds. Mara unstrapped as well, and the moment she moved, our shoulders brushed. The contact was so slight it should have gone unnoticed, but it anchored me. Anchored me in a world that felt like it was falling apart. We began the awkward, delicate dance of microgravity triage. Mara worked on patching the hull breach, hands trembling slightly but moving with practiced precision. I went through the supplies, counting aloud to keep my mind from spiraling. 3 oxygen canisters, ration packs for 2 weeks, water filters, med kit missing half its supplies, a toolkit whose pieces floated somewhere lost in the chaos of impact. I hated silence. I hated it more than the storm. Silence made me listen too closely to the faint groans of the ship. The soft creak of twisted metal. The faint hiss of air escaping somewhere in the distance. And the silence made me think, about everything we'd left behind, about the impossibility of rescue, about Mara. Her face kept appearing in my mind, even when I wasn't looking. The way her hair floated in zero gravity. The way her hands moved over the hull tear with the delicate precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. But also, the way she hesitated, that flicker of uncertainty she tried to hide. I wanted to reach out to her, not because I needed comfort, but because I needed a reminder that someone else was still alive. Someone else was still human. We patched the hull breach, side by side. Our movements were synchronized without speaking, a silent agreement, a shared rhythm born of necessity. Every metallic creak, every hiss of compressed air, felt amplified. Every shadow seemed to stretch toward us, alive with unknown threats. I caught her glancing at me, briefly, as if reading my thoughts through the tiny scrapes and bruises and blood on my hands. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I floated closer, just enough that our shoulders brushed again, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the cabin air. Later, we sat in the small galley, ration packs untouched. I could feel her presence behind me, a constant weight, a tether. "We should talk," she said quietly. "Not about repairs, not about survival. Every day. About anything." I nodded because I wanted to. Because if we didn't, the silence would swallow us whole. "Every day," I said. "Even if it's just to remind ourselves we're still here, still alive." And then night fell, though in space, night was just another flick of the emergency lights, a red glow that replaced the day cycle. We floated in our bunks, staring at the panels above, listening to each other breathe. Listening to the faint hum of the life support system that had survived the storm. Listening to the silence outside. I realized then that we were fragile. That our lives depended on nothing but metal, plastic, air, and each other. And yet, there was a strange comfort in her presence. Even in the blackest void, with nothing but the infinite darkness pressing in, we had each other. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to survive. Hours passed, though I couldn't say how many. My mind kept replaying the storm, the screams, the flashes, the way Mara's eyes had locked on mine when the hull bent around us. I wanted to tell her all the things I couldn't say, but the words stuck in my throat. Not because I was afraid of death, no, I had accepted that part, but because in this moment, with her floating mere feet away, alive and unbroken, saying anything felt like admitting just how much this mattered. How much she mattered. I pressed my hand against the wall, letting my fingers drift toward hers. Not touching, not yet. But close. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her, through the thin suits, through the hum of life support, through the terrifying silence of space. And for the first time since the meteor swarm, I didn't feel entirely alone. Day 2. Echoes in the void. The first night was worse than I expected. Not because I was afraid of sleep, sleep was impossible anyway, but because every time I closed my eyes, I saw the storm again. The meteor's swarm, the screaming metal, the flash of light as hull plates buckled. And Mara. Mara's eyes, wide and unblinking, locked on mine, searching, holding, questioning. I floated in my harness, staring at the red glow of the emergency lights, counting my breaths to keep from spiraling. I could hear her moving on the other side of the cabin. Quiet. Precise. Every step a whisper in microgravity, every gesture deliberate. I wanted to talk to her, but my mouth refused words. Fear isn't loud, it whispers, it gnaws, it keeps you frozen. Eventually she came over, gently nudging me with her shoulder. "Elias, you're awake." Her voice was soft, but there was an edge of concern I couldn't ignore. I nodded, even though it was useless. "Yeah." My throat was dry. "Can't sleep." She didn't ask why. She just floated closer, brushing against my side, and I realized how much I'd been craving human contact. The smallest touch that reminded me I wasn't completely alone in this endless void. We went through the cabin in silence, checking supplies, water filters, oxygen canisters. Each item we touched reminded me of how fragile our survival was. Every rattling med kit, every floating toolkit piece, every dented canister was a warning that life here was uncertain. "I've been thinking," Mara said finally, breaking the silence. "We need a routine. Something to keep us human." I nodded. "Yeah. Even if it's small." She smiled faintly, the first expression that felt real since the storm. "Small is good. Small is enough for now." We decided to divide tasks. I'd inspect life support and oxygen systems. She'd focus on hull repairs and ration management. But mostly we just talked. About Earth. About missions we'd failed. About fears we never admitted out loud. Each word was a lifeline in the emptiness, a tether to sanity. Hours passed, and the silence outside our little bubble felt alive. Every metallic creak, every faint hiss of air, sounded amplified. Sometimes I thought I heard movement in the walls, shadows stretching, bending, almost human. Mara noticed too, but neither of us spoke. Fear had a weight, but we carried it together. At one point I caught her staring at me. Not her usual analytical gaze, but something softer. Vulnerable. I realized she was scared too, maybe more than she'd admit. And in that moment, I wanted to tell her everything, that I was terrified, that I was clinging to her presence like a lifeline, that if she disappeared into the black I'd follow her with my eyes forever. But I didn't. Instead, I floated closer, letting my shoulder brush hers. She didn't move away. And I felt a strange comfort in the contact, a reminder that even in space, we were tethered to something living, something human. Later, while managing oxygen tanks, I noticed a slight flicker in the readings, minor, but enough to make my stomach drop. Mara, one of the filters is dropping faster than it should. Her brow furrowed. We'll fix it. Together. She drifted closer, her hand brushing mine as we worked side by side. That fleeting touch, nothing more than a spark of warmth, made my pulse race. I tried not to think about it, but in the cold, sterile cabin, it was impossible. The day passed in a blur of mechanical checks and ration adjustments. And yet, in between the monotony, there were moments. Moments where our hands accidentally touched. Where our eyes met across the cabin. Where silence wasn't terrifying, it was intimate, a fragile bond forming amid the void. By the time emergency lights dimmed for our simulated night cycle, exhaustion clawed at me. But even lying in my harness, staring at the ceiling panels, I could feel her presence behind me, just a few feet away. Breathing. Alive. Human. And for a brief, precious second, I let myself believe we might actually survive this. Even in space, drifting toward nothing, tethered to fear and to each other, maybe we had hope.